Welcome back. Today, I'm pleased to tell you a little bit about our visit to Citi Field, which is depicted in the background behind me. For those of you who have enjoyed some of the prior episodes, you'll know that the facade that's on Citi Field is reminiscent of another ballpark, one that was in play for my father when he was following the Brooklyn Dodgers. Ebbets Field had a facade similar to what you see depicted for Citi Field in the background behind me. And so that's the background that I have for you today. And the garb that I'm wearing, let me talk a little bit about that. First and foremost, the opponent for the New York Mets at Citi Field was indeed the Colorado Rockies. And so I have a cap for the Rockies that I'm wearing. And the jersey that I'm wearing, I don't think this is a bona fide Mets jersey. I think this is a fun jersey that was put together. It does sport a number 7 from the past, which I'm not going to show you from the back. And no, it's not Ed Kranepool, but it is Jose Reyes. And so that's the garb that I have on today. Okay, let me share so that we can begin to get into a little bit about this game. And let's call up the presentation and then let's make the presentation as large as possible. The first thing I'd like to do with the slide that is in front of us is just call your attention to two links. The first one is pretty obvious. This, and it's also self-explanatory. For each one of the visits to the various ballpark, almost, I've taken hundreds of pictures, and Carol has chipped in too with some pictures as well. And what I've tried to do is on the page where we describe that team or that ballpark, I have a link to a Shutterfly album that includes many of the photos from that particular visit. And that is the case for what you see here with our visit in August of 2013 to Citi Field. The second link is a little bit less obvious, but for each one of the slides where I talk about a game that we actually saw, in the lower right, you'll see this white emblem that will include the summary score, but it also is a link to a wonderful resource from Baseball Reference. What you get when you click on that, and I realize you're not going to be able to read this, is more detail than you want about the game in question. All the stats, both batting, pitching, lineups, the win probability chart, top 5 plays, you get the play-by-play. So this resource is very helpful in summarizing the game. And I would encourage you, as you not only look at these episodes on YouTube, but as you consider the presentation that I have stored on Dropbox, I'd call your attention to that link for the box score. And please try and enjoy some of that for any game that might interest you. Now, in this game, as you can see, the Mets actually won. And that doesn't happen all the time, at least at the visits that I've made to see the Mets in this journey that we're talking about. In this case, the Mets actually won late in the game, too. In the bottom of the eighth, you can see they broke a 1-1 tie with a run in the eighth that held up. They actually won it without having the Rockies come back in the top of the ninth. So anyway, I just wanted to say a word or two about that link in the lower right-hand corner and the link to the photos. Now, before we get into the game description a little bit, I think I'd like to talk to you about one other slide that you might not be inclined to go looking for um, until a long time from now, because we're on slide 12. I'm going to take you to slide 42, which, at least right now, is the last slide in the presentation because it has, I think, some relevance here to the Mets, Citi Field, and it's just a slide of general interest, I think, too. Okay, so when I was all done with everything else, including the reflections on our trip, I thought it might be nice to prepare a histogram showing for the 41 different games that we attended, how many times we saw each team, either home or away. And it wasn't until I put together this histogram that it became evident to me that the team that we saw most frequently was indeed the Mets. Now, some might say that was a conscious decision because I had a bias for those games, but not really. Um, I was very surprised when I saw how many times we saw the Mets. Now, if you think about it, we saw the Mets at Citi Field once. We saw the Mets at Shea twice. So that's only three times. The other five times, we actually saw the Mets when they were the visiting club at one of the other ballparks that we visited. So, top number of visits goes to the Mets. Tied for second, you'll see are the Cubs, Indians, Guardians, and the Minnesota Twins, which was a bit of a surprise too. Now, I clearly understand why we have seen the Indians and the Guardians so many times because we like going to Cleveland for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and some of the other attractions that are in that area. But the other couple of teams that had five were a little bit of a surprise too. Now, on the flip side, if you take a look at the teams that we have visited least frequently, you see that we saw the Blue Jays once, the Mariners, the Marlins, the Nationals, the Rays, and the Yankees, the Yankees crosstown rivals of the Mets. So that was a little bit of a surprise too. And in the case of those teams where we saw them only once, by definition, we saw them when we visited them in their home ballpark. Okay, now I'm going to go back to slide 12, which is where we are in the overall series here. It's our visit to Citi Field. And what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit more about this game. Okay. I've talked to you about the links. Next, I want to talk to you about some of the players. You can see prominently here, we have Daniel Murphy, the lefty who's batting in these two images in the center bottom and on the middle right. As a Mets player here. Now, he played a long major league career. He played for the Mets for about 7 years, I think. He played for the Nationals about three. He played also for the Colorado Rockies. And for those of you who stick with us in some of the other episodes, you'll see Daniel Murphy pop up again in 2019 when we visited Coors Field, because that's where Daniel Murphy was at the time. Another surprising thing, which I saw by going to the box score that I showed you at the link in the lower right, is that Justin Turner in 2013 was a Met. Now he's gone on to many other clubs, including the Dodgers and others, where he's been very successful following his career with the Mets. But in 2013, he was playing for the Mets. I talked about the facade. Indeed, here you can see the shot that was the background for Zoom when we just started off this particular episode. Again, that facade is reminiscent of the Ebbets Field facade, and you can see it from the outside in the top left. You can see it from the inside looking out in the shot just to the right of that. Okay, let me talk about the Delta Club, which, if you look at the lower center, the rectangular picture right here with my wife Carol in the red top, we did something at Citi Field that we don't do a lot of, which is eat at one of the clubs that is at the ballpark. But we did do that at the Delta Club here at Citi Field. And of course, we were there prior to the game, prior to going to our seats. You can enjoy what's happening out on the field from the club. We had what I would consider to be a so-so 3 or 4 on the old 0 to 10 scale meal. Nothing really to write home about, but it did give us a chance to check out what one of the clubs might have been like. Okay, I do want to talk to you about this picture, which is Casey Stengel, Charles Dillon Stengel. Casey, as many of you know, was the first manager for the Mets. He is one of my heroes. And when we went to Citi Field, I wanted to have a Casey Stengel jersey made up. And so we ventured from the Hall of Fame plaques that I took the picture of Casey for over to one of the shops for jerseys to be made. And I said, I'd like to have a Casey Stengel jersey made. And to my surprise, the people in the shop said, "Who's Casey Stengel?" So I had to help them a little bit with who Casey was. And for those of you who don't know, Casey had a tremendously long playing and managing career. I think he started playing in the 1910s. I think he started managing in the 1930s. He managed the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Boston Braves, the New York Yankees, and the New York Mets. And get this, Casey, as a manager, went to the World Series 10 times. He won 7. He won 5 times consecutively. And in the 3 times his team lost 4 games to 3. So it was close. So Casey was quite the manager. And then he came to the Mets. And he struggled, of course. You know, the first season for the Mets was 40 and 120. And only in 2024 did the Chicago White Sox come very close to replicating that particular record. So anyway, a little bit more about Casey Stengel. The first bullet on here says, we took the number 7 from Grand Central Terminal, and you can see a little bit of that right here. I'm a big fan of trains. Grand Central Terminal is got quite a bit of history as one of the significant train stations in New York City. But the train that you take to get to either the tennis center where the US Open is played or to Citi Field now is the number 7 to Mets Willets Point. And while we were in New York, I also felt compelled to come up with a T-shirt for that particular journey as well to help me remember. Okay, we've talked about the photos link. We've talked about the Ebbets-like facade. The Shea apple that would pop up at Shea Stadium when a home run was hit by the Mets would make the transition to Citi Field, and you can see me standing with my hand on part of the display there. It's actually outside the ballpark rather than inside. They have other ways of celebrating home runs now, but as part of the nostalgia and carrying forward that shade tradition, the apple is outside of Citi Field. We happened to stay right off Times Square at a very nice property, one of the Hilton properties there, the Hilton Times Square. You can see a picture in the upper right there. And that was our base of operations for the 4 or 5 days that we were actually in New York City, either touring, seeing the Mets at Citi Field, or my next installment will talk about our visit to Yankee Stadium. Among other things, that gave us a chance to tour the city. You can see a picture in the lower right of the Empire State Building. And one of the very moving visits that we made was to the 9/11 memorial at the site where the trade towers used to stand. And here in the lower right, you can see an image for where one of those two towers used to stand. A very moving visit we made, Carol and myself. Okay, one of the restaurants that we ate at was a place called Sardi's, and Sardi's is depicted right between the apple and the image of Casey Stengel there. And what one of Sardi's claims to fame is for all the images that were drawn at the restaurant of notables who would come by, either people in the movies, entertainment business, politicians, leaders. Anyway, they've got a large quantity of wonderful images on the wall. The food was much better there than at the Delta Club. We enjoyed our meal at Sardi's. That was a very enjoyable stay. Another thing that we did, and we'll talk more about touring New York City on the Yankees slide as well, but here we did tour the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Vermeer is probably my favorite artist, and he's my favorite artist because of the way he treats light. You can see in the one image here, I realize it's small, the light is coming in from a window to the left and illuminating what's going on in his work right there. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they have maybe a handful, maybe a few less. I'm not sure the exact number of Vermeers, but we had a wonderful visit there. And in addition to Vermeers, saw all kinds of others as well, other artists' work as well. That's all I have to say for this particular visit. I encourage you to hang on for the next one, which will be our visit to Yankee Stadium. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.